Okay, let's dive in. When we think about the period right after the classical world, say, from the fall of Rome through those early medieval centuries, there's this really common image, isn't there?
Oh, definitely. The Dark Ages.
Yeah, the Dark Ages, a time when, ancient knowledge just vanished. We picture libraries burning, empires crumbling, and the lamp of learning supposedly going out, just plunging Europe into ignorance.
It's a dramatic picture. And look, it certainly captures the immense upheaval of the time. I mean, things were chaotic.
Right.
But the source material we're looking at today offers, well, a really different perspective.
Yeah.
It talks about this idea of a medieval interlude.
A medieval interlude. Okay, so not a void.
Right. Not a void where knowledge just disappeared, but actually a period of crucial continuity and transmission, those big philosophical currents. Things like Hermeticism we've talked about, those sort of proto-signatures. They didn't actually vanish.
Okay, so they didn't vanish? What happened then?
They essentially retreated, found refuge in quieter, more protected channels. They went underground, you could almost say, just waiting for the right conditions to resurface.
And this deep dive is based on excerpts from a text that really digs into this, doesn't it? Looking at the medieval period's role in preserving knowledge.
Exactly. Knowledge that later became foundational for concepts like the doctrine of signatures, which we'll probably get into more later.
So our mission today, then, is to understand how those lamps stayed lit, how this vital knowledge, especially the ideas about finding meaning in, say, the shape of a plant for healing, how it survived and flowed through these complicated centuries, basically setting the stage for what came later.
That's the plan. Let's explore how that actually happened on the ground.
Perfect. So, channel number one, where did knowledge find refuge in Western Europe when everything was, well, seemingly falling apart?
Well, one primary channel the source points to is the monastic communities. These monasteries, scattered across Western Europe, became these islands of relative stability and dedication.
Right, the monks.
They really did. Inside their walls, it wasn't just about spiritual life. Monks took on this incredibly painstaking task of copying and preserving ancient texts.
Copying by hand, right, before printing presses.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm.
Works on medicine, botany, natural philosophy. Their scriptoriums were vital, like arteries carrying the lifeblood of ancient wisdom forward through a really chaotic time.
And they produced these things called monastic herbals. I've heard of those, but they weren't. They weren't philosophical treatises, were they?
No, not at all. They were intensely practical guides, mostly for the monastery's own infirmary, their sick bay.
Makes sense.
They detailed the medicinal properties of plants they could grow or gather nearby. Now, did they have explicit formal breakdowns of the doctrine of signatures or complex hermetic ideas? The source says rarely, if ever. The focus was practical healing, often seen through a spiritual lens, using God's creation to help people.
The source suggests there was something relevant there, even without the formal philosophy.
Yes, exactly. If you look closely at the detailed illustrations and the descriptions in these herbals, you find what the source calls implicit references, these subtle cues, hints of what we now understand as proto-signatures.
Proto-signatures, like the early seeds of the idea.
Kind of. Earlier, often intuitive ways, people found clues about a plant's use based on how it looked or where it grew, maybe how it behaved. The careful way a monk drew a plant's shape or highlighted a specific color or noted its habitat, this often carried an unspoken understanding of its virtues.
Like the example you mentioned before we started, Hepatica nobilis, liverwort.
Precisely. The source notes how drawing Hepatica nobilis with its distinctly lobed leaves could have been a deliberate visual cue, a pointer towards its traditional use for liver ailments.
Ah, because the leaves look a bit like a liver.
Exactly. The idea that the signature linking formed a function was preserved right there in the picture, through the practical use, through that visual association, even without a whole chapter explaining why the form mattered philosophically. So knowledge here survived through application and visual hints, all within that spiritual framework.
Okay, so monasteries in the West are preserving things through practice and pictures. But while that's happening, often kind of struggling amidst the chaos, there was something else pretty major going on elsewhere.
Absolutely. The source shifts our focus eastward, reminding us of the incredible role of Arabian medicine during the Islamic Golden Age. While Western Europe was, let's say, regrouping intellectually,
The Islamic world was booming.
it really was an incredible period of intellectual flourishing. And they were building bridges across time and cultures. Islamic scholars became these great conservators, yes, but also amazing innovators.
So not just copying.
Not just copying it all, they started this huge project of translating Greek and Roman works into Arabic, including giants like Dioscorides and Galen on medicine. But, and this is key, they went way beyond just translation. They critically analyzed them, synthesized them, and significantly expanded on them, bringing in knowledge from Persian and Indian traditions too.
Wow, that's huge.
It became this vital bridge. So much classical scientific and philosophical thought was preserved and developed there, and then later flowed back into Europe.
So what did their medical texts actually look like? How did they approach understanding plants and remedies? Was it similar to the herbals?
Their texts, like Avicenna's famous Canon of Medicine from around 1025 AD, it's monumental. They show an incredibly deep and systematic understanding of plant properties.
Systematic how?
They classified plants meticulously, not just by how they looked, but by taste, by temperament, hot, cold, wet tree, and crucially, by their effects on the body's humors.
The humors, that ancient system about balancing bodily fluids, right?
Yeah, exactly. That was central to their thinking, inherited from the Greeks like Galen. Health depended on keeping those four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, in balance.
Okay, that sounds very logical, almost proto-scientific in its own way. Do they explicitly use the idea of signatures, though? Like the liverwort example?
Well, the source is pretty clear. They didn't formally teach the doctrine of signatures in the way it popped up later in the Renaissance. Their approach was much more rooted in those Galenic principles and empirical observation. However,
There's always a however.
right. Their deep insights into the sympathetic effects of remedies, how different things influence the body in specific ways, combined with this underlying philosophy of universal order, the interconnectedness of everything. Well, that created very fertile ground for ideas about cosmic connections and correspondences to resonate.
Okay, unpack that a bit. Cosmic connections.
Well, their medicine often included an understanding of astrological influences. They linked the body and its remedies to the wider cosmos. This focus on the interconnectedness between the microcosm of the human body and the macrocosm of the universe maintained a framework where the idea of correspondences, finding links between different levels of reality, just felt natural.
So even without saying this leaf looks like a liver, the underlying philosophy made it easy to accept that things were connected in meaningful ways.
Pretty much. Even without formal signatures, this sophisticated system, the classification, the sympathetic effects, the cosmic links, it provided the intellectual scaffolding that later European thinkers could readily build upon when they re-encountered signature-like ideas. So the continuity here was really through systematic observation, seeing medicine as part of a cosmic whole, and of course that incredible work of translation and innovation.
Okay, so we've got the monasteries with their practical guides and visual cues. We've got the Arabic tradition with translation, systematic analysis, and this cosmic connection framework. What was the third channel the source talks about?
This one is maybe the most resilient, the most constant in a way. It's the unwritten current of folk medicine.
Ah, okay. The stuff passed down outside of formal institutions.
Exactly. This was the healing knowledge passed down through generations, often just by word of mouth, within local communities. It wasn't tied to formal libraries or scholarly debates.
More like kitchen wisdom, village healers, that sort of thing.
Precisely. This body of knowledge relied on intuition, on anecdote, on direct observation. My grandmother always used this for that. And this is where the use of intuitive resemblances, the very core of those proto-signatures, persisted really vividly.
Can you give an example from the source? How did that actually look in practice?
Well, the source mentions, say, a village healer using a plant with bright red sap for a blood ailment. Why? Simply because it looked like blood.
No complex theory needed.
None at all. They might not have known anything about Galen or humors, but the visual resemblance was the clue. Or think about charms used for fertility that incorporated symbols physically resembling generative organs. These were pragmatic, unwritten signatures based purely on direct association.
Passed down through doing it and talking about it.
Exactly, and the significance here is massive. This tradition represents that bedrock of human pattern seeking, that deep intuitive impulse we have to find meaning in form and pattern, even without needing a philosophical explanation for it. It wasn't a scholarly doctrine, but this living tradition ensured that the idea of a signature, the basic concept of finding healing clues in resemblance, stayed fundamental, even if informal, right through the medieval period.
So if you pull it all together, these three quite different streams, the monastic practicality and rituals, the Arabic translation and systematic cosmic view, and this deep current of folk intuition, They all worked in their own ways to make sure these ancient ideas about meaning and form didn't just vanish.
They collectively ensured survival through that medieval interlude. Each channel contributed something unique.
And what's really fascinating, as the source points out, is how this historical persistence kind of echoes, even today. It nudges us to look inward, maybe find traces of this simple, intuitive pattern seeking in really commonplace beliefs or practices.
Yeah, the echo and the commonplace idea, this is where it gets quite personal and maybe connects the dots for you listening. The source gives some great examples to illustrate this.
Like chicken soup for a cold, everyone knows that one.
Right, so beyond the science, we understand now the hydration, the warmth, the electrolytes, maybe what intuitive signature does chicken soup carry? Why does it feel right?
Well, it's warm, it's soothing, it's easy to get down when you feel awful. It just feels inherently comforting, healing somehow. There's an immediate association there, isn't there? Separate from the chemistry lab breakdown.
Totally. Or carrots for eyesight.
Mm-hmm.
We know about vitamin A, obviously, but think visually. What signature might have first suggested that link, maybe influencing folk beliefs way back?
Oh, that's a good one. If you slice a carrot crosswise,
Yeah.
the pattern inside, those rings around the core, it does look a bit like the structure of an eye, the iris and pupil. That's a direct visual thing.
A simple visual connection.
Yeah.
Exactly. How about using a lucky charm, like finding a four-leaf clover or having a horseshoe?
Ah, well, those are purely symbolic signatures, aren't they? A four-leaf clover is rare, so finding one feels special, like you've been singled out for good fortune.
The rarity itself is the signature of luck.
Yeah. And a horseshoe. Well, traditionally, wasn't it seen as protective, maybe nailed over a door? The shape, or maybe the iron, carries that meaning of protection.
The form carries the meaning. And one more, using a hot compress for muscle pain. We know heat increases blood flow, eases tension physiologically. But what's the intuitive signature of warmth itself?
It's just soothing, isn't it? It feels like it's melting the tightness away. Warmth equals comfort, release. It's an immediate gut-level association between the sensation and feeling better.
So when you consider these examples, the soup, the carrot, the charm, the compress, what do they suggest? How do these simple, sometimes non-scientific seeming practices show this persistent human tendency?
To find meaning or comfort or maybe a sense of efficacy in these intuitive associations, even when we also have the scientific explanation sitting right alongside it.
Exactly. And it really highlights how those folk traditions, the ones not bogged down in formal doctrine, could keep the basic idea of a signature alive through the medieval period.
Because they just tapped into this fundamental human thing, looking for patterns, finding meaning in the world around us. An impulse that, yeah, clearly hasn't entirely left us.
Like the source says, a river carved by time may disappear underground, but it always finds a way to flow, resurfacing stronger in another place. Knowledge is much the same.
That's a powerful image. Knowledge is resilient. It finds channels, even in times we might think of as dark or stagnant. The medieval period wasn't just an ending. It was this crucial transition.
A time when these foundational ideas were kept safe in monasteries, systematized and expanded in the Islamic world, and kept alive in the day-to-day wisdom of ordinary folk.
Precisely. Not a time of loss, really, but a time of hidden flow, quiet waiting, making sure that knowledge, including the deep roots of ideas like signatures, survive to blossom again later.
And that brings us back to you listening. As you go about your life, your daily habits, maybe even your health choices, how much of your understanding, your approach, even subconsciously, is still shaped by this ancient intuitive impulse?
That drive to find meaning and connection in the patterns and forms you see around you. How much of what we do or believe, without always thinking about it, echoes those proto-signatures from way back? Something to consider.
Definitely something to mull over.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the medieval interlude.